There's long been a debate about which is more influential in determining human behavior, nature or nurture. But how far does that get us in understanding what shapes personality, or whether personality changes over time, intentionally or just by virtue of the school of life? With us for the latest thinking on all of that, we welcome, in Edinburgh, Scotland, Michelle Luciano, behavioral geneticist and associate professor at the University of Edinburgh. In Sacramento, California, Madeline Lenhausen, a recent PhD psychology graduate from the University of California, Davis, and a quantitative researcher. And in Waterville, Maine, Chris Soto, professor and chair of psychology at Colby College and director of the Colby Personality Lab. And it's great to welcome you three to TVO tonight. Chris, I'm going to put you to work right away. What tools do psychologists use to understand someone's personality?
So psychologists typically study and measure personality in terms of the big five personality traits. Those are extroversion, the extent to which someone is outgoing, talkative, assertive, and sociable, as opposed to being more socially and emotionally reserved. Agreeableness, which is the extent to which someone is compassionate, kind, and trusting of others, as opposed to being more blunt and argumentative. Conscientiousness, the extent to which someone is hardworking, organized, and responsible, as opposed to being a bit more disorganized and lazy. Neuroticism, the extent to which someone is prone to experiencing negative emotions like anxiety and sadness, as opposed to being more emotionally stable. And openness to experience, so the extent to which someone is curious, creative, and artistic, as to being more traditional and conventional.
That's great. We actually had a graphic made up of this. And Sheldon, let me ask you just to put the graphic up right now anyway, just so we can remind everybody. Okay, this is where it all starts, the big five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And that's the stuff we're going to be talking about over the next half an hour. Madeline, maybe you could pick up the story. How much of our personality is inherent, and how much of it is our experiences in life?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. A good amount of personality is definitely inherited. Some traits may be more than others, like openness to experience, for example. Has a great deal of inheritance that goes along with it, especially due to facets of it that are related to intellect and intelligence that are very inherited. But there is still a wide array of the environment that goes into our personality as well.
All right. If part of the personality is inherited, Michelle, maybe I can bring you in here. How are our genes connected to our personality?
Yes, so twin and family studies have shown us that around half of the variation in personality traits in the population, so the differences we see between people, is due to our genes, and around half is due to our environment. So what modern research is doing is trying to identify specific genes that are associated with personality traits. And here we look at millions of genetic variants across the genome, and we associate them with different scores or levels of a personality trait. So the most studied personality trait has been neuroticism, and we've found lots of genes or genetic variants that are associated with neuroticism.
I'm going to ask a very...
still don't... Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a very politically incorrect question, and that is neuroticism. Are there groups in particular, I'm thinking of demographics, that have a disproportionate amount of that? Let's ask that.
Yeah, so that's something that so genetic research doesn't look at differences between populations, and usually, so with these genetic studies that I'm referring to, most of them have been done in populations with European ancestry, so the results really generalise to those populations. So that's not an area of research in terms of mean levels of differences between different groups that I've looked at. But we know that there is a sex difference in mean neuroticism. So women tend to be higher in neuroticism than men, and that's a well-established finding. And there's also links there. So in terms of anxiety and depression, which neuroticism relates to, anxiety and depression is also more prevalent in women than men.
Madeline, it's apparently an empirically provable, well-established fact, but are you allowed to say it today?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because women tend to compare themselves to other women often, and men tend to compare themselves to other men. But so when they're reporting on their own neuroticism, saying how neurotic they are, it makes sense with a group of women. We just tend to be more neurotic. It could seem politically incorrect, but there's a lot of research to back it up.
Okay. Chris, let me get you back in here. Can you give examples of what experiences could affect our personality?
Sure. So the main types of experiences that have been looked at by personality psychologists and the relations with life outcomes are experiences in school and in work on the one hand, and experiences in close relationships on the other hand. So on the school and work side, you can imagine that staying in school for longer, it tends to make people more conscientious because they have additional practice in completing assignments, turning things in on time, staying organized, and also in openness to experience. If you think in particular about higher education, people are intellectually curious, they're pursuing new ideas, they're learning about new things, and that tends to expand their minds a bit. And in terms of careers, it really depends what kind of job you're going into. So if you go into a career like sales, where it calls for a lot of social behavior and interacting with others, that might tend to make people more extroverted. Where if someone goes into the arts or sciences, it really continues to bring out that curiosity and creativity.
Chris, let me do a follow-up with you. And those examples you just gave don't sound like they are off the charts dramatic. It sounds like the stuff of everyday life. Do we assume that if you are experiencing off the charts dramatic, maybe the death of a spouse, or conversely, a happy day like a wedding or something like that, that the impact would be even more?
Well, in the short term on behavior, you would expect those effects, but not really rising to the level of personality change. So yeah, you can imagine kind of daily ups and downs and that affecting what behavior you show on a day-to-day basis. But people are generally pretty good at recognizing that those are just temporary influences on their behavior that don't really represent changes in their personality. Whereas if you're looking at actual personality trait change, that tends to take months, years, or decades. So happening gradually, it does happen, but it doesn't tend to be sudden.
Okay, let me ask Michelle. I guess this is sort of the most typical question that most people ask, which is, say you got identical twins, and they grow up in the same house, under the same circumstances. They go to the same school, the same this, the same that. Sometimes they even get dressed the same by their parents. Tell us why they wouldn't, at the end of the day, necessarily have the same personality.
Yes, so as I was mentioning earlier, twin research has shown us that around half of the variation in the differences we see in personality in the population is due to genes, but the other half is due to the environment. And it's not actually the shared environment. So most people consider aspects of the shared environment being your socioeconomic class or your family environment. It's the non-shared experiences that twins have that is having more of an effect on their personality.
And what's a non-shared experience?
So well, this is the big question. There's potentially thousands of non-shared experience twins could have, right? It could be something as simple as having different friends, illnesses, for instance, that one twin has that another doesn't. It's anything, even just chance occurrences that happen that just affect one twin and not the other, can set, I guess, that twin on a personality path that's different from their identical twin. And these are factors that we don't really have a good grasp of individually what they might represent, because it's very complex. Even one's parenting environment, although we might consider it to be the same, identical twins can still react differently to the same parenting experience. So it's about perceptions differing as well. So it's quite complex in terms of identifying specific aspects of the environment that influence one's personality.
I guess, Madeline, the $64,000 question here is, how well do we really know ourselves? What do you find on that?
Oh, Steve, that is the golden question. I think that's what a lot of people want to know. We think we know ourselves really well because, personality is these relatively stable patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we have, and who has more access to that information other than ourselves. And researchers show we know ourselves pretty accurately, but it's hard to say how accurately, because if you compare how we see ourselves to how our friends or how our partners see ourselves, the perceptions don't completely line up. And we could just assume that maybe our partner sees us incorrectly, and that's why those perceptions aren't lining up. Or we could think that maybe our partner sees some behavior or actions that we don't internalize as part of our personality. Yeah.
Well, let me do a follow-up with you on that. And I'm going to put this to you because I assume you are the youngest among the four of us here. And does it go without saying that you know yourself, to a certain extent right now, but 20 years from now, you're going to know yourself a lot better? Is that a given?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that just comes along with having more experiences, having more life experiences, meeting new people, interacting with people differently. And through these interactions, we learn more about ourselves. We learn how we react to situations differently. We learn how we react to people differently. And that can be used to inform ourselves more about ourselves.
Chris, are there particular personalities that have a predictable trajectory? Let's put it that way.
In terms of their change over time?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So the typical pattern of personality development over the lifespan is mostly good news. So once you kind of make it past the transition into puberty, most people tend to become more agreeable, more conscientious, and more emotionally stable across the next, say, 5 decades, from the late teens into the 60s. So people are becoming more socially and emotionally mature. Not everybody shows that particular pattern, unfortunately, but most people do.
Okay, and Madeline, let me come back to you on this one. Some of your studies, I gather, at how we perceive our own personalities versus how others perceive us. I guess I want to know whether the delta, the gulf between those two things, can you tell whether it's getting bigger or smaller over time?
Yeah, well, so it depends a lot on the closeness of people to each other. So if you look at how friends perceive each other versus roommates versus romantic partner versus spouse, the longer and more intimate the relationship, the smaller that gap gets. And that could be both because, people are learning people more by watching their behavior, by seeing them in situations that they wouldn't have seen them before, or because, say, I myself am expressing more about my personality to my partner, and they also pick up on that.
Well, now here's a COVID-related question, and that is, and maybe I'll get all of you to weigh in on this, it depends on the closeness of the relationship. We've just gone through 2.5 years where trying to have closer relationships with people has been really hard to do, either because we've been locked down, or if you're a senior and living in a senior's residence, you're not permitted to have visitors. We've been doing a lot of trying to get to know each other on Zoom over the last 2.5 years. Yes, it's opening up now, but I wonder who's going to go first on this one. Michelle, can you help us understand whether or not the last 2.5 years have been problematic in terms of our getting to know ourselves and others better?
Yeah, I would imagine that would have effect. I haven't done any COVID research myself, but perhaps one of the others on the panel is familiar with some of the studies which I'm sure have taken place.
Okay, Chris, you want to pick up on that, Chris?
Sure. So there has been some very interesting research that's come out during the pandemic to see whether it has affected people's personality development. And it's kind of a tale of two halves. So there was some research that came out very early on during the first few months to see if the pandemic was making people, for example, more neurotic, more anxious, or depressed. And people did report that in the short term, they were feeling more negative emotions. but they didn't see it as a reflection on their personality. Kind of similar to what I said earlier, that people were good about recognizing that it was a situational characteristic that was affecting their behavior in the short term, but not necessarily affecting their personality. But as things have dragged on, that seems to have changed over time. So now people have seen kind of longer term effects on their behavior, and that's translating into actual personality change. So it is unfortunate, but especially if you look at younger folks, people in their teens and 20s, it does seem like they are a bit less agreeable, conscientious, and emotionally stable right now than you would have expected if there hadn't been the pandemic. And that may be a result of kind of decreased face-to-face social interaction and the kind of social and emotional skills that we develop from that.
Madeline, I don't know if you're in that demographic. You look like you're in your 20s, so I'm going to ask you this question, but have you found what Chris just said to be the case?
Yeah, I guess partly, but again, it's a hard thing to know when you actually incorporate a situation into your personality. I don't know if I was reporting on my personality, if I would say these things. Maybe a little higher neuroticism, actually, probably for sure. I think that one would get me.
And maybe you could pick up on this. How do personalities actually change over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because, personality development, personality maturation is different from personality change, where development is more of this maturation where you become more agreeable and less neurotic and more conscientious over time. You kind of turn into that, mature adult that we all want to be. But actual personality change in a way that deviates from that normative trend, it varies a lot. Most change, or a lot of change that does happen technically, or it has to be volitional, and that means people have to want to change and people have to commit to that change pretty intensely for it to actually take effect and not just revert back to their normal levels.
Michelle, have you noticed a genetic cause and effect over the last 2.5 years?
So there has been some work, but genetic studies are very labor intensive. Nothing has been reported, for instance, just over the last 2 years of COVID in terms of longitudinal change. But we do know from previous research that genetic effects are very stable over the lifetime, so genetic effects on personality, whereas the environmental effects tend to differ more as people age. So new environmental influences may be coming into a play that affect one's personality, whereas the genes are kind of stable from very, very, very early in life.
Okay, I take your point. Chris, what if somebody really wanted to change their personality? What are the external factors that either make that more difficult to do or prevent it from happening?
Yeah, so there's some very interesting research in this area of volitional personality change. One thing that's important to note up front is that most people would like to change something about their personality traits. So if you ask people, is there something, and you ask them in terms of the big five, a lot of people would say, yeah, I would like to be a little bit more extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, and intellectually curious. Then the next question you might ask is whether they can actually do that. And there is encouraging evidence along those lines. So if you ask people now, what is the one thing that you would most like to change about your personality? And then you follow up with them a half a year from now and see how they've actually changed. There's a better than 50-50 chance that they will have changed in the direction that they want to change. And then there do seem to be some specific things that can be done to make that kind of volitional change more likely. So if you kind of coach people through the process of taking this very abstract goal that they might have of, I'd like to be more extroverted, and then you ask them to come up with specific plans of what are some particular situations where you could behave more extrovertedly, and how could you do that specifically? And then you have them kind of follow themselves over time. If they follow through and make those plans and follow through on those plans, then there is a even better chance that they will change in the desired direction over time.
Can you just follow up on that? What's one piece of advice you would give to somebody who wanted to be more extroverted, but who is by nature introverted and finds it painful to be extroverted?
Yeah, I think there are two very difficult steps that are key. The first one is taking that very abstract goal of just becoming more extroverted and translating it into specific situations and specific behaviors. So think to yourself, what are some situations when I tend to be shy and introverted? How could I act in a different way that would be a bit more extroverted? Maybe it's, striking up a conversation with a cashier when I'm checking out at the store, or starting a conversation if I'm sitting in class or at the start of the workday with someone sitting near me. So there's that part of taking the abstract goal and making it more concrete. And then the second part is just persisting over time, because for a lot of us, it's easy to change our behavior in the short term for a few days. But if we really want to see personality change, it's a matter of sticking with it over a course of weeks and months until it becomes the new normal, until it becomes our new habitual pattern of behavior. And it's only at that point that I'd really be comfortable saying that we've seen actual personality change.
Okay. Madeline, let me put it this way. Over the last 5 years or so, one could detect a massive uptick in the lack of empathy by many, many people around the world. We see it on our evening newscasts far too frequently. And I guess I want to ask you, I realize it's not one of the big five specifically, but what can you do to get people to be more empathetic in the face of so much of the toxicity that exists in both our countries these days?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Yeah, in the last 5 years, that's interesting. I see over the pandemic, it makes sense being more socially isolated. Sometimes it's easier to be hateful and lack empathy behind a screen. If you don't see someone's face, if you don't feel their social cues and feel the emotion. So one thing that really helps empathy is literally being in that face-to-face situation where you can feel the emotions that someone else is feeling, because behind a screen, it's really easy to not know what someone else is feeling and not care.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, do you find that people actually want to change their personalities? Or are they more likely to prefer just being who they are?
I can only give you my impression based on the people I know and speak to. But I think I echo what other people have said. There are particular aspects of our personalities that we wish to change. I can speak for myself as well. And so I was very interested to hear Chris talk about success people can have when you actually put your mind to it and keep reaffirming and trying to do those specific things, for instance, that extroverted people do, and pushing yourself a bit. So yes, I guess I think that's a fair comment to make, that most people probably do have aspects of their personality that they'd like to change.
Oh, should we go down this road here? Okay. Michelle, what would you like to change about yourself?
Oh, gosh.
I got two great experts here who are happy to give you lots of advice.
Yes, I think I could do, having two primary school age children, I think I could do with a bit more patient agreeableness at times.
I get that. Chris, you want to weigh in on that too?
I guess for me, it would be becoming more extroverted. I feel like I've got the conscientiousness thing down. I can manage my responsibilities, but being a bit more social, outgoing, and energetic, who wouldn't go for that?
What's preventing you from doing that right now?
I mean, I think I do have a kind of natural genetic disposition towards being more shy and introverted. It's something that I've tried to work on a bit over time. Maybe I've made some progress, but certainly could stand to make some more.
Well, the fact that you agreed to come on television and talk about this suggests to me that you are aware of it and you are taking steps to do something about it. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, certainly my initial reaction to the invitation was to be a little bit kind of shy and nervous, but I was willing to step out of my comfort zone and give it a shot.
There you go. And has the experience been as horrific as you feared it would be?
No, it definitely could have been worse.
Glad to hear that. Madeline, how about you? Do you want to add to that?
I guess I would say I would like to be a little more assertive. Just take the friendliness down a notch and, take more of a leadership role.
And okay, give us some steps about, if that's what you've identified, how would you like to make that happen?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. That's a good question. I think that's why I'm not there, because I don't know what to do.
Okay, Michelle, if you can't change what's genetic, What do you do then?
Okay, so I think just a point of clarification about what we know about the genetics underlying personality is that genes don't work deterministically. So with personality, there's potentially thousands of genes that have very, very small effect on influencing our personality. So it's probabilistic. So, and of course, when you add the environment into the mix, genes can interact with your environment. So I don't think, although there's half of the variation we see in the population is due to genes, that's not saying that there's anything truly fixed about our personalities, and that I think there is, potential for the environment to also exert quite a lot of influence there as well. But as has been alluded to, I mean, we are born with these temperaments that kind of stay with us for our lives. But yeah, there's room, I think, to kind of wriggle.
And just finally, the next steps in your research in understanding the genetic connection, where are they taking you, do you suppose?
Yeah, so to date we've focused on common genetic variants. So these are variants, as the name suggests, that are common in the population. And we know that these common variants, so single nucleotide polymorphisms, don't explain all of the genetic variants in personality. So the next, or one of the next steps at least, is to look at rare variants. And these are very uncommon variants in the population, but it's possible that they have larger effects than the common variants, which to date have explained very, very small amounts of variation in the genetics contributing to a trait. So that's one avenue of future research, looking at rare genetic variants.
Well, I know you all accepted our invitation to come on this program and share your expertise. I'm not sure any of you thought you were going to be on my psychiatrist's couch during the course of this discussion, but I'm glad that you were all such great sports about putting up with it, and we're grateful for your time very much. Thanks to Madeline Lenhausen, to Chris Soto, and to Michelle Luciano. Appreciate you being on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.